All right, folks, thank you and welcome to Coming for Your Brain on Exercise. My name is Jessica Powerseer and I am your Therapeutic Services and Lifestyle Director here at the Glencoe. And if you're not sure what that title means, it means that I help oversee the Wellness Center where we have our massage therapy, chiropractic, craniosacral, we've got reflexology, yoga therapy, medical pedicures, and nutrition services. And I help also oversee the physiotherapy department, and we have sport medicine there. If you're like, but I've seen you on the weight floor and you teach classes, that's the beauty of ADHD. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to share my screen. So you may have those slides at home if you don't already have them. Like I said, I have sent you my email, so you are welcome to request them. I'm going to make sure that my screen is big. Okay, making sure that I can see any chat. So, all right. And I think, do we have all the iPads? I just want to make sure volume-wise. I think we have them all off. I think we're good. I think we are good, friends. Okay. So, like I said, your brain on exercise. And if something happens that you chat with me and I miss it, you can always interrupt me. All right, I'm going to put that right here. It's telling me, of course, I am hardwired tonight. And so I shouldn't be having any internet issues, but of course, it's going to be one of those evenings. So your brain on exercise. Let's talk about that. And I found that cute little image and I couldn't resist. So what we're going to be talking about, like I said, I am a certified clinical exercise physiologist, and I'm going to talk about how your brain responds to exercise. And it's interesting that we have such a wonderful turnout this evening, because initially I wrote an article for Impact Magazine recently, and it was called Your Brain on Exercise. And I really didn't think people would be that interested, and the response was pretty phenomenal. And that's why I said, okay, let's share this with our membership. And same thing, I was like, 15 people sign up, I'll be excited. And we have a really great turnout tonight. So thank you. Obviously, mental health and what's going on with your brain is really important to you. So I'm going to talk about those immediate or acute and long-term psychological and some of the physiological responses, because the physiological aspects also go with the psychological components, and how it's going to respond to exercise and how that's going to impact your brain and potentially prevent cognitive impairments. Let's be mindful, you can do everything right, and just perhaps that gene variant gets turned on, but perhaps we've delayed those cognitive impairments. So let's try to delay that process as long as we possibly can. So a couple of Canadian stats of what's going on right now. And again, if you can find something, and I had a bit of a challenge finding stuff for Alberta. So if you have a link or you're familiar with the link, maybe you want to share that, because I had heard the stats. And then when I went to look for them, unfortunately, the websites that I did look on were just inundated with information. And really, they were just talking about the COVID numbers. And I really couldn't find a lot of information of what is currently going on with Canadians. But I can confidently tell you, prior to COVID and where we are now, Canadians and Albertans and us have stated, that our mental health is now worse or somewhat worse than it was prior to COVID. And so how can exercise help with that? And also look at the benefits of what it's going to look like in the long term. So one of the examples in my talk that I did with the teachers convention last week is, it's not just looking at how are you feeling today, how are you feeling tomorrow, is I want you to live a long, vibrant life. And Miss Jane Wenzel is here this evening. And if you don't know Jane, Jane and I work very closely together, and we have a program called the Be Well, Live Strong program. Initially started as a chronic, like a cardiac rehab program. Then when we saw that there's a lot of people that were like, well, I have Parkinson's, can I be in your program? And so we saw that we definitely needed to revamp the program. We did some research and we came back and said, okay, this is going to be a chronic conditions program. Then talking to more and more members, we started talking about cognitive impairments, and we really saw that we had a large member base that were starting their dementia journey, and how could Jane and I make a difference in people's lives? And so we've conducted research studies, and our Be Well, Live Strong program has a very large population of people who are living with cognitive impairments. Now you might go, but I don't know what cognitive impairments and dementia and Alzheimer's and how that all comes together. I promise I will explain that later. So During the pandemic, since the start, mental health isn't as good as it used to be. And obviously for you, you care about that. And that's why you showed up tonight. So I want you to look at this image. So this is the immediate response. So during physical activity and immediately after physical activity, this is what your brain looks like. It lights up significantly. Look at what's going on with your brain with no exercise. And so thinking about this, we are stimulating those neurons. We are stimulating the brain with extra blood flow, with nutrients and waste removal. And so really at the end of the day, we really need to flush things out and looking at the body as a whole. So that's what we're going to talk about right now, is your immediate response to what happens during and post exercise. And if any of you have, like I said, I've got a teenager staring at me. I know. I can feel it. She's making faces at me. So the immediate response of what is going on with your brain during and after. And like I said, if any of you have any extra tips you want to share with us, I am more than happy to share that platform with you. So looking at that brain during exercise, looking at that brain with no exercise, what do you want going on with your brain? We definitely want it stimulated. So let's talk about norepinephrine. And it really doesn't matter where it's made, but I know that some of you, again, you have done your education, you're quite knowledgeable, and you really do care about that information. So you're aware norepinephrine, and I'm not going to go into all the details of exactly what norepinephrine is and how it's released and all of that wonderful stuff. I just want to give you the basis of what's going on. So of course, it's made in the brain, in the central nervous system, and our adrenal glands. And so what happens when our body releases norepinephrine? And that can, again, it responds with exercise. Not that we're not releasing norepinephrine when we're not exercising, but we're going to definitely have a significant boost. And so what that's going to do is you're going to find after a bout of exercise, and what do I mean a bout of exercise? We recommend a minimum of 10 minutes. We would prefer to see somewhere around 30 minutes. The more you exercise, of course, the bigger the response. However, let me just stress that there are some people who do over-exercise, and the same thing, it's a pendulum. Too much exercise can be problematic. Too little exercise can be problematic. So even if you're not active right now, what could you do even in bouts of 10 minutes of continuous, more like cardiovascular training? So it could be just going for a walk, walking up and down the stairs. What's that bout of exercise going to do to your brain? Well, number one, it's going to increase our attention. So norepinephrine allows us to be able to have better attention. It's also going to affect our perception, a perception of what's going around, but also how we're perceiving ourselves. And it's going to increase our motivation. So you can see when you start to exercise on a more regular basis, so you do these bouts, and I don't know if anyone's ever been to, sorry, my brain just went right over there. I'm just trying to think of who the speaker was. It'll come to me later. Oh, it was Greg, our old CEO. And he talked about whenever he has to go into a big presentation, when he would do it for the board, or he'd have to do a big presentation at any organization that he was presenting at, he always goes for a run. And the reason that he always goes for a run is that same thing. What it does is it allows him to, of course, increases his motivation, and it allows his attention so he'd be able to hyper focus. Now, what happens if we don't have enough norepinephrine? Well, of course, it's going to affect us. It increases your likelihood of feeling like you're depressed. It's going to affect your ability for your memory. So your ability to be able to take that information, bringing in, absorb it, so go from short-term into that long-term memory. So it could be like, I keep studying, or I do things at work and I just can't remember. Maybe it's that your brain needs that nice big flush of norepinephrine to help you bring that attention back. And of course, it's going to affect that concentration. So if you don't have enough norepinephrine in the body, again, you may be experiencing depression, memory issues, and inability to be able to concentrate. So if you're experiencing 3 of those things, then a good bout, again, a minimum of 10 minutes, preferably something a little bit longer, but something is better than nothing. Now, in some cases, some individuals will produce too much norepinephrine. And I want you to think it's all on a pendulum. So you're going to see that if you're seeing depression over here, a lot of times you're going to see anxiety on the other end. So if we're producing too much norepinephrine, some individuals report that they experience anxiety. A lot of times, if any of you have experienced anxiety or you're living with anxiety, you've noticed that your heart rate is going to be a lot higher. You notice that your blood pressure is going to be a lot higher, and you're going to feel a lot more stress. And so that is your body's way of actually going to a flight or fight state. So if we think about the adrenals, so if any of you are somewhat familiar with the adrenals, and perhaps you've heard the terminology, you're in adrenal fatigue or you're in adrenal failure. And that's where a lot of our flight or fight comes from. And so if those adrenals are fatigued or they're overused or they're overproducing, they're going to definitely affect you. So being very mindful of that, of what's going on. And I got a question that just popped up. What's going on in that body? You know what, Mike, that is actually a really great question. And I am not a medical doctor, nor am I a psychologist. And I do apologize. I actually don't know exactly how much norepinephrine is enough. But I would say if you're feeling depressed, you're having issues with your memory or concentration, then chances are you're not getting enough norepinephrine. If you're finding yourself more anxious than usual, you find your heart is racing, you're finding that you're feeling like, I know I can feel when my blood pressure is up and I'm feeling really stressed out, then I got to say, okay, maybe I'm producing too much norepinephrine. And that's where, again, perhaps we look at a functional medicine, to kind of go in and get those hormones tested and see what's going on. It could be that you go to your doctor and you say, I want to get these tests and find out what's going on, and then kind of get those hormones and everything kind of regulated again. So I appreciate you asking that, but I do apologize. Slightly out of my scope of practice, but I'm honored. Okay, I'm going to close that up. Now, any questions right now about norepinephrine? Just peeking because we just have a little chat that popped up. Thank you. All right. So now we talked a little bit about norepinephrine. We kind of know where it's made in the brain, and we know what's going to happen when we exercise. What are the benefits of immediate exercise? It's going to increase our attention, our perception, and our motivation. So if you're having a hard time getting motivated to do that project, or you're having a hard time getting motivated to work, or you're just having a hard time focusing, period, a little bit of exercise will provide you with control. Not enough norepinephrine, be mindful. Too much, of course, be mindful of what's going on. Moving on to the next slide. What could it be? Dopamine. And we're going to be talking about dopamine, and I'm going to pop forward. We're going to be talking about serotonin, and we're going to be talking about endorphins. And those, my friends, are your happy hormones. We often talk about endorphins as our happy hormones, and we forget how important serotonin and dopamine is. So if we look at dopamine, again, it doesn't matter if you don't fully understand where it's being processed, right? Again, my friends who are psychologists who did a lot of studying of the brain, they're like, I know where the ventral tegmental area, the VTA of the midbrain is, and the substantial nigra pars. I'm like, I know where the hypothalamus is. So it's okay if you're not familiar where it is, just know that it's produced in the brain. Now, what's going to happen when our body is releasing that dopamine? So when we're exercising, during that exercise and immediately after, look at this, motivation. So we were talking earlier in the previous slide, attention and motivation. Dopamine comes in and it's going to be that double dose of motivation. It's also going to help us with that focus or that attention. It's just how you look at the terminology. And same thing if we come back here, right? Our ability to learn, and that's going to affect that memory. So you can see how norepinephrine and dopamine are very complementary, and how you could see they call it our happy hormone. Now, what happens if we don't have enough dopamine in our body. Again, you can look here. So it is definitely associated with ADHD. And so if any of you, I know I'm going to say this and Jane's going to laugh, but I am such a big fan of TikTok right now. And you might be like, what is TikTok, Jessica? Or some of you are like, my teenagers are on TikTok. Well, the boomers and the Gen Xers and the millennials have taken over TikTok, and there is a whole educational component on TikTok. And I follow a number, if you're not surprised, I have ADHD. So it's very interesting to me to follow these different psychologists who actually talk about ADHD, and they talk about individuals who have ADHD have, not all the times, but they are more prone to having addictions, and especially sugar addictions, because sugar gives us a boost of dopamine. And so for individuals living with ADHD, we're going to look for those little bursts of dopamine because we don't have enough. And that's why you can see individuals who are living with ADHD, individuals who are perhaps living with with depression, bipolar, or schizophrenia, their likelihood of being addicts is significantly higher because that addiction will give them that burst of dopamine that their brain is craving. So if you're not getting enough dopamine, it usually can be associated with ADHD. Now, with that being said, some people, it doesn't matter if you get the dopamine all leveled out. So there's always going to be a percentage of individuals changing our diet and exercise, like I've said, will make no difference at all. For a larger part of the population, though, when we start exercising on a regular basis and when we start looking at our diet, and I'm going to pull a book up really quick. It's my favorite book. As you can see, I'm kind of a bit of a book fanatic. The dogs are here. They've come to visit. The lab, I don't know if you can see my labby. Okay, I don't know if you can see this book. This is a game changer. It's called, from Patrick Holdford, and it's called The New Optimum Nutrition for the Mind. And it talks about schizophrenics, and so what a lot of schizophrenics, what they're missing in their diet. So schizophrenics will have a lot of the similar, they have a very difficult time absorbing certain vitamins and minerals. And so if they're not absorbing them, they're not going to have them available. Same thing with individuals who are living with ADHD, individuals who have depression, anxiety. It's all covered in this book. Now, with that being said, this is not going to fix everything, but it's always good and mindful for us to consider that of what is going on. Now, I saw a question pop up, so I just want to make sure I get to it. But I do think it's a great book, and it did change my perspective. You can't see me on the slide. Let me just see. I don't know why you cannot see me. Let me just ask, can anyone else not see me right now? Because it just could be how the screen is set up on yours, Mike. Sorry, I'm just going to minimize my slides for a moment, just to make sure that you can see me. Okay, so they can see me, so it just could be, Mike, how you have me set up, that you just can't see me, so I do apologize. Now change your view, Mike. There is, and I'm not quite sure how to find that button for you, so I do apologize. So hopefully you're able to see the book. What I will do in the chat is I'm going to add it to the chat for those of you who are like, I would just love to have a new book. So let me send everyone. It's called The New Optimum Nutrition for the Mind. And it's Patrick Holford. There. So I just put that in the chat. So the book. Now, like I said, this is not a diagnosis. It's to help empower you if you want to have more information of how diet and exercise. I'm here to talk about the exercise component. I'm still tangenting because I want to talk about this for a moment, because you might be like, okay, so you talked about schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, and gene variants. What is a gene variant? So a thing that we do with the Glencoe, and I'm not trying, I apologize. It sounds like I'm going to be upselling nutrigenomics. But I did nutrigenomics with Samara Fileski Hunt, our registered dietitian. And what nutrigenomics does is it tests over 60, it used to be 45 different genetic markers. It tests over 60 markers, and it actually might be up to 75, but I don't want you to quote me on that. The fee is $3.99, and I will tell you right now, Samara charges us actually a really good fee. There are some medical doctors that charge $1,200 for this. And it tells you if you carry the gene variant. So what was happening with my family members, my husband and my daughter especially, they kept getting colds and lung infections. And I couldn't really understand why. Well, when we did the nutrigenomics, excuse me, puppies. When they did the nutrigenomics, what it did is it came back and it said that they carry the gene variant that makes it difficult to absorb vitamin A. Well, vitamin A deficiency is completely linked to your lung health. So if you're having difficulty to be able to absorb a certain vitamin or mineral, then that's going to affect everything. So vitamin A, for example, is going to be healthy lungs. Vitamin B, especially your B vitamins, are really important for your mental health. So if you carry a gene variant, which my family does, it's very easy for them to have anxiety or have depression because we have difficulty absorbing vitamin B. And the list goes on and on and on. So I can talk about that later, but that's not the focus right now. So I just wanted to tangent for a moment, talking about gene variants. And if you carry them, it doesn't mean that the gene's been turned on. It's the same thing. There's a certain gene that is associated with Parkinson's. There is a gene associated with dementia and depression, schizophrenia, all of that. Have we turned that gene on? Okay, so let's go back to where we were. So coming back, if we don't have enough dopamine, it is associated with ADHD, as you can see, associated with Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's falls under that umbrella of dementia. So sometimes people kind of think of them hand in hand, think that now you might go, well, the Alzheimer's Society, they can't change their name now. They've been around for over 35 years and it would just be too confusing. So the Alzheimer's Association is the place to go if you know that you're having cognitive impairments or someone close to you, or they've been diagnosed with dementia. They have all the tools to help support you. So Alzheimer's is an umbrella term. And then we have the different types of dementia. So one of the types of dementia, frontal temporal lobe, you can have frontal lobe dementia, temporal lobe, a combination, vascular dementia that we will often see with individuals who've lived through a stroke. And Alzheimer's is another form. And I'm not going to get into all of those because that we cover in the best friend approach, which I believe is coming in a few months. So if you want to find out more information, you can about that. So Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia. Now, let me just jump back over to nutrigenomics. It does not test for the gene variants for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, or any of that. It tests the basic nutritional ones. So vitamin A, vitamin D, your folate, all of that type of stuff. So I just wanted to be very clear with that. Now, what if your body is producing too much dopamine? It's going to be the opposite. So agitation, anxiety, cognitive function. So that ability with that memory. So if you keep asking yourself, and there are days, trust me, and I'm sure any of you who have a family member who is living with dementia or mild cognitive impairments, and I know maybe Jane has asked herself too, I often ask myself, I'm like, oh my gosh, because I know so much now. Am I in the early stages of dementia? Sometimes I ask myself that, but then I have to take a step back and go, okay, do I have enough norepinephrine in my body? Do I have enough dopamine? Do I have enough serotonin? All of those things. Have I been exercising enough? Am I taking care of my body nutritionally? And so kind of looking at all of that. So again, when we exercise, it is immediately released and it will hang around for a while. That dopamine is going to help us with that motivation. It's going to help us with that focus, and it's going to increase our ability to learn. We don't have enough. Of course, it has been associated with ADHD, Alzheimer's. And I'm not saying if you don't have dopamine for one day. We are talking again, chronic. So I'm talking about some of the long-term stuff right now because it kind of associates what we're talking about. But long term, when you don't have enough dopamine, it has been associated with these chronic conditions. Too much dopamine, again, agitation, anxiety, cognitive function. Good to move on? All right. So serotonin, and this is like one of my favorite images. I end up stealing it and putting it in a lot of my slides. It just makes me feel like, yes. So, and if anyone, we had Lauren, and God, I just forgot. You're like, you forgot again. I know, but my brain is not thinking about Lauren, the gut specialist. My brain is thinking about this. So in the summer, we actually had a gut biome specialist do a talk. And if you're interested in getting information about her, you can let me know because I can get you in contact. And so you're aware your gastrointestinal tract is so important to your mental health. And the reason being is that 95% of your serotonin is made in your digestive tract. So if your digestive tract is not properly absorbing the nutrients, you could be doing everything right. You could be taking a multivitamin, you could be eating a really good balanced diet. But if there's something going on with that digestive tract where it's gotten sluggish, it's gotten a little backed up, perhaps there's inflammation, you might not be absorbing the nutrients that you need. And if you're not absorbing that nutrients, of course, that is going to affect your mental health. So Lauren, our gut biome specialist, and she's a contractor that we take out, she will actually test your fecal matter because they can tell by your fecal matter what is going on with your digestion. They can see how much carbohydrates are being digested, how much protein, how much fat. Are you losing a lot of your vitamins and your minerals? And those are all really important. So here I go again on a tangent. Let's talk about this. Some people have been with me in these talks. We have teeth for a reason. And we have teeth so that we can masticate and chew our food. Our food digestion starts in our mouth. We have amylase, and amylase is, again, that secretion, your spit. And so you don't want to spit on anybody anymore. But amylase starts to break down the carbohydrates. So carbohydrate digestion starts in your mouth. So what I will often tell my students is if you're a really big fan of smoothies, I want you to take your smoothies and swirl them around your mouth to make sure that you're mixing the amylase with the carbohydrates. Because if you don't properly masticate and get that amylase breaking down the carbohydrates, then your stomach has to start breaking down the carbohydrates when it needed to happen in your mouth. So we want to chew our food, if you can, up to 20 times. Now, realistically, if you're eating bread, you're not going to be able to chew it 20 times. So you're going to chew as much as you can till it gets into a little hot, sloppy mess. Carrots, you're probably going to be able to get it done in 20 chews. So just being mindful of that. Then what happens? Protein digestion in the stomach, and then fat digestion happens just outside the stomach. So if you're not properly chewing, what we will see is things are not properly going to get digested. One way to know if you're not properly chewing is to take a peek in the toilet after you defecated. And if you leave remnants, little streaky friends behind, that will tell you that you are not properly digesting your fat. And if that means if you're not properly digesting your fat, chances are you didn't properly digest your proteins and you didn't properly digest your carbohydrates. So try chewing a little bit better and see after a week if those little streaks have disappeared. And if it hasn't, then it's definitely worth talking to Lauren, the gut biome specialist, or making an appointment to talk with Samara, or of course, Rory, also our registered dietitian. So coming back, serotonin is produced in the GI tract, most of it there. So if your gastrointestinal tract is not functioning properly and it's not absorbing, you're probably not going to be producing enough serotonin. The beautiful thing is when we exercise, it's going to increase our mood. It's going to help us be happy. Guess what? Not enough serotonin, we're going to feel depressed. If we have too much serotonin in the body, we're going to feel anxiety. We're going back to that pendulum. It's interesting that I have my 14-year-old loves to ignore me till I go on camera. All right. Any questions about serotonin and my little tangent? We're good. Now let's talk about the other happy hormone. And I'm just checking my timer to make sure that I am on track. Endorphins. Many a times you hear it. This is one of the major reasons why people exercise. Fitness professionals love to talk about endorphins and talk about it is our happy hormone. But we sometimes forget it's not just endorphins. Of course, we want to include serotonin and we want to include dopamine, and same thing, they are released when we're doing exercise. Endorphins are made in the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus. And so what happens? It's going to increase our euphoria, that runner's high. So it gives us a lot of excitement. We feel good after we exercise, we pump around, and especially it'll come from cardiovascular based exercise. Not that you can't get it from strength training, but there's a reason why we call it that runner's high, is when we get that heart working and we get all that blood pumping around, that's where we're going to get it. Now, let me, again, tangent a bit. So when we make a definition of what cardiovascular training and strength training is, cardiovascular training is usually associated with the cardiovascular system being the heart, being the lungs, and its highways. So the arteries and the veins. And so when we exercise, especially with cardiovascular training, over time, our heart is going to respond. Our heart is a muscle. So that muscle is going to get stronger. If you push your heart and you're getting yourself into an exercise intensity that makes you feel winded, that's going to actually create an effect. We call it the Frank Starling effect. So Frank Starling was the doctor that recognized that when you challenge the heart actually gets bigger and you get an athlete's heart. What do I mean by that? Specifically, the left ventricle, and that's the bottom chamber of your heart. So your heart is broken up into 4 chambers. The left ventricle is the bottom chamber on the left side. Why the left side? Because the left side is going to pump the blood to the top of your head, all the way to your tippy toes, and all the way to the tips of your fingers. And so that's why it's really important. So when we exercise, the chamber may increase in size, which means more blood can come into the heart. The muscle is going to get stronger and more efficient, so we can push more blood of that heart out of the heart. So there's always a little bit of blood that stays behind, and it's called your ejection fraction. Some of you are like, you're getting too intense for me. We measure that as exercise physiologists. And so if we're seeing something like an ejection fraction, and some of you who may be with me today who have cardiovascular disease, your doctor may have talked to you about this. So let's say an ejection fraction of 50% means that only 50% of the blood is leaving your left ventricle. We don't want that. We want something that's a lot higher, right? We want to be up like 90%, but there's always going to be a little bit of blood that stays behind. So when we exercise, especially cardiovascular training, and especially cardiovascular training that's going to get you winded, I'm not saying out of breath and you feel like you're dying, but that you can have like 1 or 2 word conversations. That's the type of intensity we want. And that's where we see the biggest release of endorphins. So it's going to give us that euphoria, but what it's also going to do is decrease our pain. It's going to dull that sensation of pain. So for individuals who are living with chronic pain in their lives, exercise is really important. It's especially important for people who are living with arthritis. And arthritis can push you into a spiral, and a really quick spiral, right? Your knees hurt. Well, my knees hurt, so I'm not going to walk as often as I used to. So now suddenly you're not walking as much as you used to. Well, then your knees start hurting a little bit more, or other parts of your body start hurting a little bit more. And then you find yourself suddenly not moving as much as you used to. And then you're stuck in a severe pain cycle. Well, when you exercise, it's going to decrease the pain. So it's going to make arthritis a little bit more manageable. And a little tiny tangent, it is common that when you are exercising, if you are living with arthritis, that you're going to have pain during. But being mindful that 2 hours, this is how we know if you did too much during your exercise session. If you are in more pain or the same amount of pain or more pain 2 hours after your exercise session, you did too much, okay? So if we don't have enough endorphins, guess what? Depression. Now, too much endorphins, I have to tell you, I did quite a bit of research, and I really couldn't find anything credible that I felt comfortable presenting with you today. So if any of you are familiar with it and you're confident saying that if you have too much endorphins, this is what's going to happen, share it with us. And again, endorphins strongly associated with exercise. So maybe I have too much endorphins. So like I said, we often say that endorphins are our happy hormones. It should also include serotonin and dopamine. Now, let me just take a step back and let's just connect norepinephrine and our dopamine. So again, look at attention, perception, motivation. Motivation, focus, ability to learn, and our mood. I mean, come on. And if any of you are familiar with, you're hanging around people in the fitness industry, honestly, how often do you see us being cranky? Because we're constantly moving. And it gives us an ability so that we're not focusing on the things that are making us angry. It focuses us to an ability to focus on something else, and it gives us a sense of control. So I want this for you too. Are we good? Any questions before I move on to the next slide? Good? Okay. We talked about endorphins. Good. BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Now, if you've been with me in other presentations, and sometimes I get a little bit passionate about BDNF, and I actually watched one of my presentations, and it's good. I hate doing that, but I recently watched one of my presentations, and in the presentation, I actually made a pretty extreme claim where I said, BDNF is the only way that we can produce new neurons. That's not the case, but it will help us significantly increase and help develop more neurons. So brain-derived neurotrophic factor, it's a neurotrophic factor, and we produce it when we do moderate to vigorous intensity exercise, and we have even higher results when we work at a vigorous. So we're getting very winded. Our body goes, bam, here you go. Let's get you some BDNF. So it is made in the pituitary gland. And so for those of you who are not familiar, if you look at this, you're like, it's like a set of testicles in your brain. Yeah, kind of looks like that, doesn't it? So it's in your brain right here. That is your pituitary gland, my friends. It is teeny and it's tiny. And so what happens when we produce BDNF, again, brain-derived neurotrophic factor? It is released during moderate to vigorous, especially vigorous exercise. What it does is a neuroprotector. So it's going to protect the neurons. So I put a little image of what a neuron looks like. And so we get that communication, and then we send it off to the next neuron, or what is going on and how it communicates. It sends those signals in the brain. When we develop cognitive impairment, the neurons start to die. And the neurons die for different reasons. And so the different diagnosis, Alzheimer's, we call it plaques and tangles. And so we get tangles that start to tangle around, plaque develops around the axons and the just drawing a blank, and I'm not going to focus on it right now because this is what I'm focusing on, but it's going to protect those neurons. It's also going to repair the neurons. So if there is any degeneration that is happening with those neurons, exercise is going to come in and fix that. It's also going to help you produce more neurons. So yes, we are always producing new neurons, but the thing is, if let's say, for example, you carry the gene variant, that's you're going to develop dementia, and I think it's APOE. No, it's APOE, I believe. Anyways, that's the gene variant. And so if that gene variant, in some families, and some of you are familiar with family members who are at the Glencoe, and Jane and I personal train, again, we have a family member who is living with dementia, and that individual sibling is living with dementia, but then the other sibling is showing no signs of cognitive impairment, and the other sibling. So all four of them could be carrying the gene variant. Two of them, that gene variant hasn't been triggered, where those two, maybe they have. Maybe only the two that are living with dementia carry the gene variant, and these two didn't get the gene variant. And so if maybe you carry the gene variant and it's kind of been kicked on, high intensity exercise will release BDNF, so that when those neurons start dying because our body is killing them off, then you start to produce more BDNF. So yes, our body will produce more neurons, but we may not be able to produce enough neurons quick enough to affect that cognitive functioning. When we exercise at higher intensity, we produce significantly more neurons. So a neural protector, and it's going to repair those neurons, and again, a neurogenerator. And of course, it also works with other hormones so that it helps regulate your mood, and it's going to provide you with that mental clarity. Again, BDNF completely associated with cognitive impairment. Any questions about BDNF? I'm quite passionate about it, and I could talk about it for a really long time. We're good? I'm just peeking, no questions have popped up. Good. So we talked about norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin. We've talked about BDNF, endorphins. So we are good. Moving on to the next slide. Now, blood flow. I did talk about this a little bit earlier when I was talking about the heart, but when we exercise, more blood is going to be flowing. So on average, and when I say that, everyone's a little different, we have about 5 liters of blood in the body. If you're a large individual, 6'5", you're going to have more blood. If you're a 4'11" individual, you're going to have less blood. But we say on average, we have about 5 liters of blood moving through the body. And so when we start to exercise, we're going to be moving more blood around. I got friends coming in to join us. All right. And so when we start to exercise, the blood's going to start flowing. Our heart is going to respond. So when we start exercising, right, let's say your resting heart rate was maybe somewhere around 75 beats per minute. When you start exercising, your body is going to respond. So it's going to do a couple of things, and I'm going to get a little bit technical, but I think it's important for you to be aware of that. So our body will respond, of course, because it's going to need more oxygen. Your body's going to need more nutrients, and it's going to, of course, it's just going to want to move around. So our heart rate is going to respond by increasing. Another thing that's going to happen is it's called our stroke volume. And so every time our heart beats, there's a certain amount of blood that leaves the heart. And I'm not going to talk about the amount of blood because this is not exercise physiology 101, and I can do that talk one day, but a certain amount of blood is going to leave the heart. So what happens is that when we start to exercise, our heart rate increases. Our stroke volume is going to increase to a certain extent so that our cardiac output, which is the amount of blood that is pumped through the body in 1 minute, is going to increase so that we can get that blood volume going around. I brought up Jane because I think it's important that you guys also recognize that Jane and I work very closely together. And one of the things that Jane and I have interestingly observed with our individuals who are living with dementia is that we take everybody's heart rate prior to exercise, and we take their heart rate, their blood pressure prior to exercise, and then we take their blood pressure post. We also do heart rate, but I'm going to talk about the pre and post blood pressures. With our individuals who are living with cognitive impairment and dementia, we have actually seen a correlation between cognitive impairment, so how they're doing that day, and what's going on with their blood pressure. And so I'm going to do a quick tangent. Our blood pressure, of course, is how much we have to push on the artery walls to get that blood moving around. With some of the individuals we are working with who are living with dementia, we have seen that their blood pressure is extremely low. Like we've even seen one of our gentlemen be down around 84 to 44, 84 the number on the top, 44 on the bottom. And that is exceptionally low on average. We want to see something about 120 over 80. We get concerned when the numbers get too big. But to see something around 80 over 40 tells me that there's not enough pressure. So I want you to visualize you turn a hose on, and you turn that hose on really light. Are you going to, that's my timer telling me that I'm 45 minutes in. And so what that's going to, when you turn that hose on and there's not enough water coming out, you're not going to be able to push that water across to the other end of your garden. Well, I want you to hold that hose up. If you have it turned on really light and you hold that hose up just like it would, right? When the blood's coming out of the aorta and then going into the arteries and trying to get to the top of the brain. So if I have my hose on really light, what's going to happen with that blood? it's not going to pop up to the top of my brain. It's going to kind of spew around. When my blood pressure increases to something like 120/80, then there's going to be enough. When I turn that hose on, not necessarily full blast, but when I turn that hose on just enough, then suddenly that hose can get enough of a water stream up. Same thing, that blood is going to get to the top of the brain. If that water, that pressure is too high, let's just say that we place something on top of it. If the pressure is too high, and you've seen water damage before, too high of a pressure, just like the opposite, can be problematic because it's going to damage, are we ready for this? The endothelial cells inside the arteries. So inside of our arteries, we have single layers of endothelial cells that protect us. And a lot of times we will see, and that's why they call blood pressure, high blood pressure, the silent killer, is that when we start moving from arteries into the arterioles, all the little branches, this is when we start seeing the damage, and it starts to damage those junction points because the pressure is too high, and we damage the endothelial cells. And then once we damage those endothelial cells, that's when LDL, we call it the bad cholesterol, it's gotten a bit of a bad rep, because again, we do need cholesterol in our body, and that's a whole nother talk for another day. Now, like I said, too much cholesterol, not a good thing. It's a pendulum, but we do need to have cholesterol in our body. And if you want to talk more about that, we can later. So we start to damage that. So it's important with blood flow that our body is able to respond with a strong heart rate and respond with enough blood pressure to be able to get cerebral perfusion. So what Jane and I were seeing with our clients, especially the ones who are living with cognitive impairment, that there is a complete association in their ability to focus on us, their ability to follow tasks, the ability to just the short-term memory, to remember who Jane and I are, to remember what they're doing. And so the days that they come in with very low blood pressure, they couldn't follow along. They were lost and agitated. Where when they would come in a somewhat, because they never really quite hit 120/80, when they got into an area where their blood pressure was somewhat normal, they were able to, again, follow along with us. They would somewhat recognize us. They were able to follow along with those tasks. So blood flow is so important for the brain. So if your blood pressure is too high, blood pressure is too low, it's going to affect your brain in different ways. So when we exercise, of course, we're going to increase that blood flow. It's going to get more oxygen and nutrients to the brain. The brain, again, your central nervous system, it requires oxygen all the time. And I want you to think about times where you've perhaps gone from a lying to a standing position or a seated to standing position and you got lightheaded. That is your brain saying, oh my goodness, I am not getting enough oxygen. And what I'm going to do is that when you're lightheaded, it's really important to move those legs and get that blood flowing, right? Because we want to milk the blood back to the heart, especially for those of you who are perhaps working and living with a weakened heart or congestive heart failure or anything like that. Your heart may not be strong enough to pull that blood up to the brain when it needs to. And that's where sometimes people will black out or they will faint. Because when you faint, that puts your body at a level, and then your heart doesn't have to work as hard to get blood up to your brain. So your brain requires oxygen at all times. Of course, it's going to provide nutrients to the cells. Blood carries nutrients, and so we're going to deliver that nutrients to the cells, and then all those byproducts and the waste, we're going to eliminate it. So the beauty is when we exercise, we increase that blood flow. That blood flow so good for that cerebral perfusion. It's going to affect our memory, our concentration, all of those things. And so what's going to happen if we don't have enough blood flow? So perhaps you've had a stroke. Perhaps, again, not enough cerebral perfusion, definitely associated with cognitive impairment. So if you have someone, and again, chat with your family members, or even ask yourself some questions if you're going, okay, you know, there's so many things that I'm hearing tonight that maybe I need to be talking to my doctor about, or even, you know, reaching out to myself, and I can get you in contact with the right individuals. So of course, blood flow, oxygen, nutrients, waste removal. Question has popped up and I love it. Yes, Mike, actually, there are other measurements of healthy blood flow. They tend to be a little bit more invasive, and we tend to we get those done with our cardiologist. So of course, getting a stress test. And so that's where they do a couple of different styles of stress tests depending on where you are heart health wise. So they can do more of diagnostic where they kind of inject. ECG is one of them, absolutely. So ECGs, you ready? I'm a nerd. All right, Mike, I don't know if you can see this, but I have my practical electrocardiography book. And so I've actually, as you can see, one of the things I had to do when I did cardiac rehab is every heart rhythm, actually can tell me exactly what is going on with your heart. It can tell me which chamber in the heart that you're having issues with. It can tell us where we have the electrical communication, if there's issues with it. I had 2 of my patients actually have myocardial events while they were exercising with me, but they had severe diabetes and their nerve endings, they actually didn't have a lot of sensation. I could actually see that they were having a myocardial infarction while they were exercising and they didn't know it. And in both times, both of my patients survived, no issues. We called 911 and they were brought in. So ECG is a way that we can do that. Getting a stress test where they actually connect you to leads and then you walk on a treadmill. They'll take pictures and images of the heart. So I'm really happy that you did bring that up. So blood pressure, absolutely, it's a great way to monitor it. It tells us a lot of different things. Heart rate is another thing. And of course, going through something a tiny bit more invasive with your cardiologist or your medical provider. And of course, you can get this done with an exercise physiologist. We don't do ECG work at the Glencoe, but there are exercise physiologists in a clinical setting that will do ECGs. So thank you for bringing that up. Yes, echoes, cardiac ultrasounds. Thanks for bringing that up, Jane. I was forgetting that. All right, let's move on. So before we move on, do we feel somewhat more confident with the immediate response of what's going on with our brain? So let's go back really quickly because I always like to do that. So release of norepinephrine, again, attention, perception, motivation. Dopamine, motivation, focus, ability to learn. Serotonin, our mood. Endorphins, euphoria, and protects us from pain. BDNF, neuroprotector, neurogenerator, and repairs. And it's going to help with our mood and mental clarity. Blood flow, more oxygen. We're going to bring those nutrients in, and we're going to do that waste removal. Okay, now this is an image of a brain that's been exercising all of their life versus an individual that did little to no exercise all of their life. So you can see a significant difference of how the brain lights up and what the brain looks like. So we're going to talk about some of the long-term effects of what happens to your brain, and then I'm going to give you a couple of tips on exercise. Now, chances are a lot of you, I'm preaching to the choir, but perhaps it's something that you can share with family members. It could be your parents, it could be siblings, it could be even your children. So the temporal lobe. And so your temporal lobe is actually right here, and it is greatly affected by your hearing. So if any of you have actually heard Dr. Carrie Scarf talk, she's an audiologist that I often bring in to do talks. And there is a strong correlation between hearing loss and developing temporal lobe dementia. Because if you don't use those neurons, and that's why it's so important, and here I am on a tangent again, but it's going to benefit you. So if you have a family member or someone is telling you constantly like you're deaf, or you're saying, what? Repeat it again. It could be that, you have to be one of those people that focuses. Like I'm ADHD. I was at we went out to a restaurant the other night and there was a guy talking at the other table so loud. And my husband was talking to me and I was literally looking at him and I couldn't hear him because my brain hyper-focused on the guy talking over there. Sometimes my family members will be like, are you deaf? I'm not deaf. I hyper-focus to the wrong things. But so if your family members or yourself, if you've noticed some hearing loss, get it dealt with right away. There is no shame in wearing hearing aids. It doesn't mean you're old. I would much rather see you in a hearing aid and making sure that you are hearing well, keeping those neurons happy and cared for. So when we exercise on a regular basis, it's going to increase our functional capacity of the temporal lobe, which is responsible for storing sensory memories. So if you have anyone in your life who is living with dementia, and I use dementia because, again, a lot of us can really resonate with it. If all of a sudden they have difficulty, just their hearing or their memory, ability to talk. So if somebody's had a stroke and that stroke happened in the temporal lobe, that can affect their language, their emotions. So they went from being a really happy person and then suddenly, they're this really cranky individual. Something is potentially going on with that temporal lobe. Our ability to learn, how we process auditory stimuli, that all happens in the temporal lobe. So when we exercise on a regular basis, we really can awaken that temporal lobe. And so we want that. So it's going to help store our sensory memories. And like I said, it is responsible for our ability to hear, our ability for memory, our ability for language, our emotion, our learning, our processing auditory stimuli. So if someone in your life has been diagnosed with temporal lobe dementia, these things will be affected. If somebody has been diagnosed with frontal lobe dementia, that is going to present itself very different. Every dementia is very different from the other. None of our patients at the Glencoe that we are working with are the same at all. They all learn differently, and we have to respond to each of them uniquely. So when we exercise on that long-term basis, we're going to be stimulating that temporal lobe, protecting you. Now, are we going to stimulate it immediately during exercise? Yes, but we get more efficient in the long term at being able to activate it and keep it healthy. The other thing that we really stimulate in the long-term response is the hippocampus. So if you look right here, right at the base of our brain stem, you'll see the hippocampus. And so what happens, it actually will grow in size. And that's going to affect our ability to learn, and it's going to affect our memory. And now this one's really interesting, and I find this quite fascinating. The hippocampus is responsible for enabling us to form spatial memories. So your ability to look around. So think about the first time, I'm going to use the Glencoe, for example. The first time I went to the Glencoe, I was like, I don't know where I am. But eventually my hippocampus took the spatial awareness and created a memory. How do you get from point A to point B? How do you get to the fitness department from the entrance? And so it's going to enable us to do those spatial memories, help navigate the environment. So what's safe and what isn't safe. It's going to store new information in our memory. So if we're having difficulty, if that hippocampus is starting to decrease in size, because it is part of the limbic system, and I will talk about that later, that of course is going to affect our memory. And comparing sensory information with what the brain expects. And so sometimes one of the things we talk about, and if anyone is, again, dealing with someone who's living with dementia, is somebody whose hippocampus is being affected. When they're walking and all of a sudden, let's say they were walking and all of a sudden it's a big dark carpet and they stop, it's because their brain can't figure out if they're going to fall into an abyss. They don't recognize that they're just walking on carpet, and you may see them scoot around the carpet. And so that darkness, their brain doesn't have that ability to figure that out. We got another person joining us. Isn't that wonderful? So the hippocampus is really important. Another thing that is really important I just want to jump ahead. Okay, good. The hippocampus is really important. If all of a sudden somebody had no issues driving around, but now they're getting lost, that is a sign that that hippocampus, of course, is affecting that ability. It enables us to form spatial memories for navigating the environment. So if there's issues with the hippocampus, then it's going to make it more difficult. Like all of a sudden, you're driving and you're like, I have no idea where I am. And some of you have seen that with your parents or individuals who are close to you. And that could potentially be a sign that we're starting our early stages of cognitive impairment. So when we exercise on a regular basis, our learning and our memory is going to grow in size. So that's the long-term effects. Another thing, of course, and I brought that image back, Again, I've been talking about it all evening, but this is what happens to our brain when we exercise. We decrease our risk of developing Parkinson's. And these are the long term. So the short term is our mood, our memory, our ability to focus, all of that's going to change. Long term, because I want you to live long, vibrant lives, I don't want to see you in our program. I would much rather not see you in the program. So it decreases your risk of developing Parkinson's, decreases your risk of developing dementia, your risk of developing depression and anxiety. Like I said, though, you could be doing everything right. You could eat well and you could exercise and you could potentially develop these anyway. It's based on, did you choose the right parents? So what gene variants did your parents carry? Did that gene get engaged at some point in your life? What we have seen, though, for the majority of individuals, your likelihood of developing those four and other types of, cognitive issues decrease significantly. Any questions at this point? Good. And if they come up, I'll answer them. Okay, let's look at the next slide, because you might be going, okay, you gave me those immediate, you gave me the long term, but what do I need to do so that I can start helping my body? So the Canadian Society for Exercise Physiology, that is the gold standard in Canada. In the United States, it's the American College of Sports Medicine. I am certified with both as a clinical exercise physiologist, and this is what they recommend. This is what the research shows as a minimum. This is what we recommend. 18 to 64 years old. Now, under the age of 18, we recommend that they get, and we call them children and youth. Children and youth should be getting a minimum of 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity, at least on most days. We prefer to see somewhere around 6 days a week. And some of you are going, that's not happening in my house. Yeah, COVID hasn't, I'm not fighting with the kids every day. I try. So if any of you are living with teenagers, you know, I try. So we want to see, we don't have extremely specific guidelines, but what we want to see is individuals under the age of 18 are trying to achieve on most days at least 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity. We also want them to be doing a lot less sedentary activity, and we want to see light activity like pitter patter, get at her, move around. 18 to 64 years old, these are our guidelines, and I'm going to go over them in a moment. What happens when you're over 65? You don't have to exercise anymore. I'm just joking. That's not true. What we recommend after 65 is you also start adding balance activities. Now, why can't you add balance-based activities along with all of this? You can, but it's just so that you're aware. So individuals over the age of 65 have the same exact guidelines. We just recommend incorporating more balance activities. So guidelines to see those health benefits, adults aged between 18 and 64 should accumulate at least 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity aerobic physical activity per week in bouts of 10 minutes or more. The reason we say aerobic is I go back to what I was talking about earlier, because when we exercise at a moderate to vigorous intensity, our heart will increase. It will respond because it's a muscle. So the chambers may also increase in size. So we increase the efficiency of the heart, and we can only get that through aerobic activity. Resistance training is also really important, but I want you to think, when we think resistance, we think muscles, we think ligaments, we think tendons, and we think your metabolic rate. So the more muscle mass you have, the higher your metabolic rate is going to be, which is going to help you become a calorie burning machine. So aerobics takes care of your heart, it takes care of your lungs, it helps feed that brain. Not that you're not going to see those benefits necessarily with resistance training, but often with resistance training, we're not doing the continuous bout of activity unless you're doing more perhaps of a CrossFit or a high intensity interval workout. But often if we put a heart rate monitor on, you will sometimes see individuals, because we're doing those peaks and valleys, which is great, we need those, but sometimes in our strength training workouts, our heart rate won't be high enough for us to see those heart benefits. So we recommend, of course, and I say we, CSEP recommends 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity. So that's where you're having difficulty forming a sentence versus I can't talk to you right now. I'm doing hot girl stuff. That's a TikTok thing. Sorry, I went over there again. So even a 10-minute bout. So it could be you're going to go for a 10-minute walk in the morning. You're going to go for a 10-minute walk at the end of the day. And you do that 7 days a week. Bam, you got 140 minutes right there. So at least, I mean, you're missing the guideline by 10 minutes, but I would much rather see you do something than nothing. And going back to our grandparents or your great grandparents, you know, they didn't go to the gym per se. You know, I think about, you know, you were active, you moved around the house, you were cleaning, you were being active all day long. And the research does show that the people who have less sedentary behavior, we are in a really good situation. So if you're a little bit hesitant to get into that moderate to vigorous intensity, then I'd rather see you moving and doing something than not doing anything at all. We also recommend that you do muscle and bone strengthening activities using major muscle groups. So we recommend anywhere from 8 to 10 of those major muscle groups. Think chest, think back, shoulders, biceps, triceps, your core, not just crunches. Often if we engage the quadriceps doing like a squat or a lunge activity, the front of the thighs will get the glutes, your booty. We also want to do an activity for the back of the thighs and then those calf muscles. There we just hit 8 to 10 of those major muscle groups. Then you can get a little fancier. Maybe you hit your inner thighs and your outer thighs and all of that other great stuff. But we want to try to do that at least 2 days a week. So right now, if you're doing 4 strength workouts a week and you're not doing any cardio, I challenge you, if you can, take one of those days and try to commit to cardio. Or if you're doing 4 strength workouts, I'm just throwing imaginary numbers out. Can you stick in to start at least a 10 to 15 minute bout of cardiovascular training, either at the beginning or the end of your workout? With that being said, for those of you who are big strength people, you might be like, well, I don't want to do cardio at the end of my workout. It's going to deplete my muscles and I'm not going to see that increase. That's another talk, but you can always ask me questions about that. And of course, the more physical activity you do, it's going to provide greater health benefits. Now, let me just jump back for a moment. If you're doing all vigorous workouts, we don't want you achieving 150 minutes of work. We're going to recommend somewhere around 90 minutes. So if the workouts that you are doing, I'm going to use like a HIIT class or a heat class or Philip Naduga's class on Wednesday morning. If you're doing classes like that 3 days a week, you've already achieved that goal, right? So if you're doing vigorous, high intensity workouts, if you get somewhere around 90 minutes, we're pretty happy. Okay. I'm going to give you some tips right here. So again, am I preaching to the choir? You may already know all of this information, but I always think it's important just to give people reminders that it's okay if you're just getting started to do something. You've got to listen to your body. If something doesn't feel right though, make sure that you do check in with your healthcare provider. So how do you get 150 minutes a week of cardio? Maybe you do 50-minute sessions 3 times a week. Maybe you do 30-minute sessions 5 days a week. So especially individuals who are living with high blood pressure, we call it actually a high blood pressure. And again, Jane can attest to this. We have seen individuals who come into us who have high blood pressure prior to exercising. And then after they're done exercising, their blood pressure has dropped down. And what happens is we release nitric oxide. You're like, what? So our cells will release in the artery nitric oxide, which then relaxes the artery. And then that way there's a little bit, tiny bit more flexibility in the artery. So after exercise, so for people who are hypertensive, it will create a more normotensive response, which will bring you into somewhat of a normal blood pressure. And we can see those benefits depending on the intensity of the exercise and the individual up to 12 hours after exercise. So for individuals who are living with high blood pressure and those individuals who are living with diabetes, I would like to see you exercise 5 to 7 days per week at a moderate intensity of 20 to 30 minutes. So cardiovascular, and it could be walking. Because what that's going to do is if you have high blood pressure, it may push you into a normotensive response. My diabetics, what that does, and you want to try to exercise at the same time, preferably in the morning, and especially for individuals who are taking insulin, you will then be able to figure out what you need for insulin. We don't want to be, if you're on insulin, we do not want to be exercising in the evening, because that could be, again, that's a whole nother lecture and a whole nother time, but it could be very dangerous to your health. Exercise tips, a reminder, you can go for a walk. We got great legs. Calgary is great at having all kinds of paths all over the city. It could be that you want to go for a jog. I meant to say a jog. God love me. Is B close to G? It is. Okay. I'm usually really good at looking over my slides. So it could be that you're going for a jog, a run. Maybe you choose to bring the kids and the dog. Now, if you don't want to run, don't run. I hate running. If you ever see me running, your life is in danger. You should be running too. I like cycling. Okay, what is a better cardio exercise, running or swimming? That's a really good question. I always come back to, what do you prefer? And so whatever you prefer, and if you enjoy that more, then it's not going to seem as tedious. Now, it really depends on the individual, and it depends on how hard you're swimming and how hard you're running. And so, again, it comes down to genetics. So what kind of ma and pa you got, what type of muscle fiber types you have. So you have 3 different types of muscle fibers in the body. 2 of them are more of a fast twitch, and 1 of them is more of a slow twitch. And so it really comes down to, what do you have more of? It also comes down to that body composition. And so some individuals are going to be more efficient in the water, and they're going to have a better cardiovascular response. Some people are going to have a better cardiovascular response running. Biomechanically, I'll use myself for example. I don't do a lot of swimming anymore, and it's kind of pathetic, but it all comes down to the hair. I was actually a really, really good swimmer back in the day. I was a competitive swimmer. You put me in the pool and I'm very efficient. Get me running outside and my knees start to hurt, my lower back starts to hurt. I've had my mechanics analyzed. I'm just an individual that's not meant to run. So it was a great question. And here I am again, not giving you a clear answer, but it really comes down to so many factors. And for me, it's, what do you enjoy more? Good? Okay. Another thing, we sometimes forget how great the stairs are in our house. Now, of course, always be cautious when you're coming down, but why not walk up and down the stairs at varying intensity? So maybe you're going to do 5 sets of your stairs at a slower intensity, and then 1, you sprint up as fast as you can, and then you go down as fast as you can, and then you slow back down. We've got different workouts that I have posted on YouTube that they potentially could be on the Glencoe YouTube page too, of how to use the stairs in your house. I even got one where you do a step aerobics class on your stairs. You don't even need a step. And then perhaps you do a virtual or a pre-recorded workout. We have so many available for you as members. So there are free virtual classes for you. And there's also all kinds of pre-recorded workouts available on the YouTube page. Perfect for people who are just getting started, and also perfect for individuals who are looking for a higher intensity. Coming down to muscular fitness. Our goal, of course, is 2 total body workouts a week. If you're going to split it, upper body, lower body, then maybe you're going to do 4 workouts a week. Perhaps you're going to focus where you do the front of the body and the back of body, 4 workouts a week. You want to try to give yourself, so let's say I work my biceps one day, you want to give it at least 2 days, especially if you got delayed onset muscle soreness, because that's a sign that you worked your muscles and those muscles need recovery. And so it's very important that you give your body that time. So you could, same thing. It could be, and it doesn't have to be timed. I kind of threw it in there. Actually, no, I made a typo. I moved it over, I copied and pasted it, and I actually was just gonna cross that out. For those of you who printed this off, cross that out. That was supposed to be for cardio. I tried to keep my slides all look the same, and then I would paste them over. So 2 total body workouts a week. We're gonna wanna ignore that little part. You're gonna come over to the exercise tips. So we call it compound training. It's pretty efficient. And that's where you tend to work the agonist, the primary mover, followed by the antagonist. But if you're working your triceps, it would be then the agonist, and that would be the antagonist. So don't worry about the terminology, but we end up working the opposing muscle groups. Work your chest, work your back, work your biceps, work your triceps, work the front of the thighs, work the back of the thighs. If you work your outer thighs, work your inner thighs. If you do the front of the abdominals, do your back also. And so we recommend that you repeat 2 to 3 sets. So that means if you're doing squats, you do them 3 times, not one after another. Maybe it's squats and then you do bridges, or maybe squats and deadlifts, and you do that. You can alternate that 2 to 3 times. Realistically, if you go, well, I only have time to do it once, you're still going to see the benefits. But research has shown the greater benefits will come when we do those exercises a few times. And you're going to repeat something for about 10 to 15 repetitions. Now, depending on where you are in your strength training journey, the lower the repetitions and the higher the weight is where you're going to see the larger muscle mass increase. Then the higher the repetitions and the lower the weight is where you're going to see more of that muscle endurance, or what sometimes people like to say toning. If you want to be kind of in the middle, then that's where we're going to go. And it's a perfect place for people to kind of get started. So lower rep ranges, somewhere maybe around 4 to 6 reps with a higher weight. That's where you're going to bulk up that muscle. Let me remind our female counterparts that estrogen makes it very difficult for us to be able to bulk up. And then of course we need testosterone. We need testosterone to allow us to bulk up. So being mindful of that. So 2 to 3 sets, 10 to 15 repetitions, and you want to try to hit chest, back, triceps, biceps, quads, hamstrings. Do you have to do that? No, there are so many different training techniques. If you're not sure, you can always ask me about them, or we could always get you set up with a personal trainer who can take you through that. Of course, if you're looking for a book, not any trainings, where's my strength training books? Actually, I'm going to give you my favorite. That's my favorite is NASM, based out of the United States of America, and it's called the Personal Fitness Trainer Textbook. This just absolutely, they did an absolutely phenomenal job, and they go through all the different types of training modalities. They talk about speed, agility training, plyometric training, all of that wonderful stuff. For those of you who are craving more information, you can also use this thing called the Google, and the Google can help you find more information. But again, we have so many phenomenal fitness leaders. I have to say, I love working at the Glencoe because our personal trainers are so damn smart. All right, so we talked a little bit about what do we do for cardiovascular training, what do we do for muscular fitness. Like I said, I want you to scratch out the 3 days a week for 50 minutes and the 5 days a week for 30 minutes. That was a mistake. I carried that over from the previous slide. Okay, we're almost done. All right, does anybody have any questions? So I'm just going to reverse back. We talked about the immediate response of what's going on with the brain. So what are we releasing? How is that going to affect us in that short term? And then we also talked about the long term and how that's going to affect that cognitive impairment or the cognition. Let me reiterate that cognition in the long run. Okay, I went over. Are we surprised? I'm going to stop sharing my screen. My contact information is there, and I will come back. All right, ask away. Any questions? You're all too shy. You're like, just stop talking. I hate running too. Thank you, Laura. I'm happy I'm not the only one. Come to a cycling class one day when we're allowed to come back again. That's how we'll get our cardio in, you and I. The cubic workout. I don't know, Mary. Jane, do you know what the cubic workout is? Oh my God, did I just age myself? Thank you, Jane, because Jane was the person that keeps me cool. Mary, do you want to tell me about the cubic workout? Eh? Oh my gosh, I need to Google this right now. Cubic. You know, it sent me to an app. I don't want an app, do I? Or do I want an app? Cubi, okay. Cubi, C-U-B-B. Oh, C-I. I'm Googling it. That's what the Google's for, right? Under desk elliptical. Is that right? Is that what you mean? Then I say absolutely. If you can get a treadmill, like a desk with the treadmill, or you can get something with an elliptical, or even like a little bike that you can put on your desk, because again, pitter patter, get at her is actually going to benefit you a lot. I will tell you, one of the things, okay, so previously before I moved to Calgary, I actually lived in Brooklyn, and I actually worked with a number of individuals who were in end stage renal disease. And so they had to go in for dialysis. What I actually made all my clients buy was one of those little portable like cycle ergometers, and it was easy for them. It just had a little handle and they could wheel it in with them into the hospital. And I made them during dialysis, I made them just keep moving the whole time they were in dialysis. And it actually cut the time down that they were in dialysis, and a lot of them had diabetes, and their insulin and their medications went down. So absolutely, I would say if you're in a situation where you can get a desk that's like the treadmill desk, or you can get the desk that's got the elliptical, or something where you can just buy that little ergometer for the feet, or even an ergometer for the upper body, absolutely make that investment. Mike, do you really want to know this? I don't want to tell you because I love drinking. What are the effects of alcohol, even moderate, on cardio health and on brain health? Unfortunately, research does show long-term alcohol consumption, even moderately, can have impairments. Unfortunately, I ignore it. It's like the one thing I ignore. I'm like, this bottle of wine is fine, says I. Actually, I brought a bottle of water up with me, but wouldn't it be fun? Here I am. It's just water. So I do apologize. Yes, even moderate. Now, but one little tangent. The Mediterranean diet actually recommends a glass of wine. How big that glass? Anywhere from 6 to 9 ounces. They do recommend wine with supper because it increases the acidity in your stomach, and it does help you digest your food a little bit better, but not with breakfast and supper.
You just said not with breakfast and supper.
I'm saying not to drink wine with breakfast and supper.
But you just said to have
supper. Oh, I did. You're right. Breakfast and dinner. See, this is why the 14-year-old hangs out and she just criticizes me from the corner. Okay, breakfast and lunch, but supper is fine. Any other questions, friends? And so what I'll write here, because I did talk about, oh, okay, here's a good question coming. Yep. Parkinson's like dementia was doing, has not done exercise for 2. Oh. You know what, Keith, that would actually be phenomenal just to get her moving. If you have access to it now, it may be difficult for her. I know that, you know, Jane and I did talk to one of our, the recreation people that we did our research study with, and we did try doing stuff virtually with individuals who were living with dementia, and they really had a difficult time following what was happening on the screen. So I don't know if that would affect your wife. But if she's able to virtually follow along, absolutely. And there are all kinds of really great programs, especially Carla leads gentle workouts that your wife might appreciate. And if it's safe for her to be able to do the stairs or even just walk around the house, that will make a significant difference. And I mean, if you can try to convince the caregiver, right? It doesn't have to be overly structured. It's, you know, and I know that going outside right now is really dangerous. And oh Oh, Jane, that's such a good question to ask Keith. So Jane, Keith, Jane is asking you, does she like to dance? Yeah, she likes to dance. Jane, what are you suggesting, baby?
If she doesn't follow along to virtual, you can always put on her favorite songs, like a playlist from Spotify, maybe from the era that she grew up in, and just get her moving. Even if she has balance issues, like if she holds onto the back of a chair or she's somewhere near something she can grab onto, and get moving and dance along to the music. It doesn't necessarily have to be super structured.
Mm-hmm. I'm also including a playlist. And so if you go on Apple Music, if you have an Apple Music playlist, if you search under my name in Apple Music, so I'm going to try to see if I can show you it. It's sometimes hard, but if you hit the search icon, I apologize, it's kind of hard to see it. If you hit the search icon right here, if you have Apple Music, you have to have Apple Music. And then you're going to go search, and you go to, you want to go to Apple Music. So you'll have your library or Apple Music. If you go to Apple Music and you type my name in, Jessica Powerseer, all of my playlists are available. So you'll see my hair is green. And in my playlist, I have like a 7-hour playlist from the 1950s right up to the 80s. And so a lot of you that might be going, I don't know what to do. And we're looking for a playlist that they're not going to get bored. Let's just see if I can find it. Oh, so many playlists. Okay, in the playlist, and it's called Janelle because my neighbor's parents had their 50th anniversary, and her father is living with dementia, and I made him a playlist so that when he felt like he was zoning out and he didn't feel like he was part of the party, he had music to associate with. Okay, so it's called Janelle's. Let me find it. It's way at the bottom of the playlist. I even have a 70s. Janelle's parents' 50th anniversary, and I added a pew pew, but I did add that in the conversation. So that is available on Apple Music, and I know that this playlist is really hard to see right now. Or like Jane said, you can go on Apple Music or you can go on Spotify and find some of her favorite music. Any other questions? I'm really happy you were here, Jane. Thank you. You saved me a couple of times this evening. So of course, and what I'll do is I'm going to stay around for questions, but some people are being polite and they're like, well, I don't want to leave. She didn't say it's time to go. So I do appreciate each and every single one of you taking time to be here this evening. Of course, a reminder that I am not a clinical or registered psychologist. I am a clinical exercise physiologist, and we do talk a lot about behavior and mental health with the Canadian Society for Exercise Physiology. And so this is why I wanted to present this to you, is to remind you of what are the good things that are going to happen to your brain immediately, and what are the good things that can happen to your brain when you exercise in the long term. And then again, I will stay here for you, but you don't have to stick around from this point on unless you have any questions. And thank you for making time to be here. And thank you for Jane for saving my bottom a few times.
Can I go on my computer now?
Sure. Good, Marcy, I'm really happy that we got you motivated. And again, don't be shy to email me if you have any questions, or you just need a suggestion of maybe a virtual class or even a YouTube workout to just get you going again. I can always guide you. So I'm going to stick around for another 2 minutes unless you have any questions. Nicole, I did send an email today with the presentation. If you didn't get it, because maybe you signed up a little late, I will send you my email. And if you send me an email, I will get it to you tomorrow. I'm going to send, there we go. So Nicole, I'm sending you my email. Yes, Keith, I think the gentle exercise, and I actually have a chair workout available on YouTube. And if you wanted to, should I bring the nanny? Right, you could bring your wife, and she could work with Jane. Unfortunately, the nanny wouldn't be able to come in with her at this. Well, Jane, what do you think? Because it's the same household.
I think that they were saying caregivers were allowed to come in.
Okay.
But if she wants to work with me, I meet a lot of my clients down at the front doors and escort them to the gym. So I'm happy to do that as well.
So Keith, you know what? This could be really good because Jane could help give the caregivers some tools of the things that you could possibly do at home with your wife. And it was so nice to see you guys today. Sorry, a hair just literally went in my mouth. And so I think that this could be really beneficial for your wife and, of course, the caregiver. And because she is a live-in, she is part of your household, so that wouldn't be a problem to have her up on the weight floor with Jane. Coming off a serious injury, I'm sorry to hear that. And you're coming off physio. Now, of course, with the physio, have you been cleared? Have they given you exercise? So what I would suggest is start a little more gentle. If you like, I was going to say like swimming, and we can't go in the pool right now. So we're exercising from home right now. Sandy, what I would recommend, get out walking. I hate swimming. I hate swimming too because it ruins my hair and my nails. I used to love it, love it, love it. But starting with going for walks, honestly, you'd be surprised how efficient it can be. And, following those YouTube workouts, going through them, watch the first few minutes of them and just see if you're resonating with that instructor in that workout. I would definitely say if you can find something that's got a bit of a combination, do you have a bike at home? You don't want to be biking outdoor, but maybe you have an indoor cycling bike. And it could be, just a traditional bike. You have a wind trainer. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I have 2 workouts on our YouTube page that are for indoor cycling. And what I did is they were done on a cycling bike, but I also have other ones that I did on my wind trainer where I just shifted through the gears. And so that'll give you a great start. And then hopefully, again, no one's watching you. So you don't have to worry about other people judging that you're not working hard enough. So if you go on the Glencoe YouTube page, I have 2 specific cardio workouts that you can follow along if you're interested in trying that. And then again, Sandy, you can always send me emails if you have any questions, and I can help guide you for sure. All right, 1 more minute. Thanks, Jane. I appreciate you being here. All right, folks, I think that's my cue to call. So if you have any other questions, again, you have my email, jpowerseer@glencoe.org. Please do not be shy to email me. And thank you, Keith. I really appreciate you being here. It was nice to see you today, too. All right, everyone, I appreciate you. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you at the next talk.